Rain lashed against the cracked asphalt as former Marine Staff Sergeant Leon O'Connor stepped into the darkened alley behind Miller's Market. He expected to find local strays tearing through the garbage. Instead, he found a starving German shepherd, ribs pressing through matted, mud-caked fur. But it wasn't the animal's skeletal frame that stopped the combat veteran cold. It was the stance. Despite being on the brink of death, the dog held a perfect, disciplined, defensive posture. This was a highly trained military canine. And when the dog limped forward and dropped a blood-stained set of dog tags at Leon's boots, the veteran realized this animal hadn't been abandoned. He was on a mission, carrying a secret that powerful men were already killing to keep buried. The coastal town of Bremerton, Washington, was known for two things: a sprawling naval shipyard and a relentless, bone-chilling drizzle that lasted 9 months out of the year. For 32-year-old Leon O'Connor, the grey skies were a welcome blanket. They muted the world. They kept people indoors, which meant fewer crowds, fewer sudden noises, and fewer triggers to send his mind spiralling back to the dust and blood of Helmand Province. It had been 18 months since Leon's honourable discharge from the United States Marine Corps. 18 months of waking up in cold sweats, fighting ghosts in a cramped, isolated cabin at the edge of the dense evergreen woods. To keep his hands busy and his mind quiet, he worked the night shift organising freight at a local logistics warehouse. It was mindless, heavy labour that exhausted him enough to occasionally grant him 4 hours of dreamless sleep. It was a Tuesday evening, just past 11, when Leon pulled his beat-up Ford Bronco into the flickering glow of the neon sign at Miller's Market. The local grocery store was the only place open late enough for him to grab a cheap cup of black coffee and a stale turkey sandwich before his shift. The parking lot was desolate, save for the store manager's sedan and a flickering street lamp that buzzed like an angry hornet. As Leon stepped out of his truck, pulling his waxed canvas jacket tight against the cutting wind, a sharp clatter echoed from the narrow alleyway running along the side of the brick building. It sounded like a metal trash can lid hitting the pavement, followed by a low, guttural scrape. Leon's posture shifted instantly. The slouch of a tired civilian vanished, replaced by the rigid, hyper-aware readiness of an infantryman. His heart rate ticked up, a familiar dose of adrenaline flooding his system. He told himself it was just a raccoon, maybe a local teenager looking for trouble, but his boots were already carrying him toward the shadows. He rounded the corner of the brick wall, slipping into the gloom of the alley. The smell of rotting produce and wet cardboard filled the damp air. "Hey!" Leon called out, his voice a low, authoritative rumble. "Store's closed." Nothing moved. The only sound was the rain drumming against the metal dumpsters. Leon took another step, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. Beside the farthest dumpster, a shadow detached itself from the surrounding blackness. Leon instinctively dropped his center of gravity, his right hand hovering near the pocket where he kept a folding tactical knife. A low, vibrating growl rolled through the alley. It wasn't the frantic, aggressive bark of a frightened stray. It was a measured, warning vibration, a sound designed to assert dominance and establish a perimeter. Leon reached into his jacket and clicked on his heavy-duty mag light. The beam of white light sliced through the rain, illuminating the creature backed against the brick wall. It was a German shepherd, or at least, it used to be a magnificent specimen of one. The dog was in horrific condition. Its normally plush black and tan coat was matted with thick, foul-smelling mud, engine grease and dried blood. Its ribs protruded sharply against its flanks, each breath a laboured, shallow wheeze. The animal's left hind leg was held awkwardly off the ground, trembling with weakness. Yet, despite its catastrophic physical state, the dog's eyes were locked onto Leon with terrifying focus. The ears were pinned back slightly, the jaw set, the front paws squared. Leon lowered the flashlight beam slightly so as not to blind the animal. "Easy, buddy," he whispered, all the tension leaving his shoulders. "I'm not going to hurt you." He took a slow step forward. The dog didn't retreat. Instead, it shifted its weight, placing itself deliberately between Leon and a shredded, olive-drab canvas duffel bag tucked behind the dumpster. That was the first anomaly that struck Leon's trained mind. A starving, injured stray would either flee or attack out of sheer panic. This dog was holding ground. It was guarding an objective. "You're not from around here, are you?" Leon murmured, slowly crouching down to make himself smaller, less threatening. He extended a hand, palm up. "Come here. It's okay." The shepherd stared at him. The amber eyes held a depth of intelligence and weariness that Leon recognized all too well. It was the same look he saw in the mirror every morning. The 1,000-yard stare. Slowly, agonizingly, the dog's posture broke. The rigid defensive stance melted into exhaustion. The shepherd took one hobbling step forward, then another, dragging its injured leg. It didn't approach Leon's outstretched hand to sniff it for food. Instead, it closed the distance, lowered its heavy, wet head, and gently pressed its forehead against Leon's chest. It was a gesture of total surrender, of profound relief. Leon let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He carefully brought his hands up, resting them on the dog's cold, shivering neck. The fur was coarse and filthy, but beneath the grime, Leon felt the thick, muscular build of a working breed. "I got you," Leon said quietly, running a hand over the dog's flank. "I got you, buddy." As Leon's hand moved down the dog's chest, the animal suddenly pulled back. It turned its head back toward the shredded canvas duffel bag by the dumpster. The dog let out a sharp, urgent whine, looking from the bag back to Leon. "What is it?" Leon asked, keeping his flashlight trained on the dog. The shepherd limped over to the pile of garbage. It dug its snout under the canvas flap of the ruined bag and pulled something out. Turning back to Leon, the dog approached and dropped a small metallic object onto the wet asphalt, right at the toe of Leon's leather boot. The clinking sound was unmistakable. Leon froze. He slowly lowered his flashlight to illuminate the object on the ground. There, gleaming dully in the rain, was a set of standard-issue military dog tags. The chain was broken, twisted, and caked in dried, dark brown blood. Leon picked them up, his fingers brushing over the stamped metal. He wiped the grime away with his thumb and read the raised lettering. Crawford, Daniel J.U.S., M.C.O.P.O.S. Leon's blood ran cold. He knew that name. Corporal Daniel Crawford was a K-9 handler attached to Special Operations Command. He was also a man who had been officially declared killed in action over a year ago in a helicopter crash in the Al-Anbar province. The Department of Defense had stated there were no recoverable remains. Leon looked from the bloody dog tags to the starving German shepherd. The dog sat back on its haunches, staring at him, waiting for its next order. "You're supposed to be dead," Leon whispered into the rain. Leon abandoned his shift at the warehouse. Within 10 minutes, he had the massive, shivering shepherd loaded into the heated cab of his Bronco. The dog hadn't resisted. When Leon opened the passenger door and patted the seat, the animal had tried to jump, failed due to its weak back leg, and allowed Leon to lift its 70-pound skeletal frame onto the upholstery. The drive back to Leon's isolated cabin was tense. The heater was blasting, filling the truck with the overwhelming stench of wet dog, swamp mud, and copper. But Leon didn't roll down the windows. His mind was racing, connecting dots that formed a terrifying picture. Daniel Crawford was dead. The military had held a closed casket memorial. Leon hadn't known Crawford personally, but in the tight-knit veteran community, word travelled fast. Crawford had been part of a highly classified task force. If Crawford's dog was here, alive, wandering the back alleys of Washington state with his handler's bloodied dog tags, the official narrative was a lie. Leon pulled off the main highway, his tires crunching onto the long, winding dirt road that led to his property. The cabin sat on 5 acres of dense, unforgiving timberland, completely obscured from the main road. It was his fortress of solitude. Tonight it felt like a bunker. He carried the dog inside, laying him on a thick wool blanket near the wood stove. The cabin was Spartan, a single room with a kitchenette, a heavy oak table, a bed in the corner, and a gun safe bolted to the floorboards. "All right, let's see what we're working with," Leon muttered, grabbing a large steel bowl and filling it with warm water and some plain chicken broth he had in the pantry. He knew better than to give a starving animal a massive meal. Refeeding syndrome could stop the dog's heart. He set the bowl down on the rug. The dog immediately smelled the food. Its head snapped up, a string of drool forming at the corner of its mouth. But the animal didn't dive for the bowl. It looked at the food, then looked up at Leon, sitting perfectly still. It was waiting for the release command. Leon swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. The discipline was ingrained deep into the dog's bones. "Break," Leon commanded firmly. The dog instantly lowered its head and began lapping up the broth with frantic, desperate energy. While the dog ate, Leon retrieved a fully stocked medical kit from his closet. He knelt beside the animal, turning on a bright, tactical headlamp. He needed to assess the injuries. "Easy now," Leon cooed, gently running his hands over the dog's legs. The left hind leg wasn't broken, but it was deeply lacerated, the wound angry and infected. He found old, jagged scars across the dog's ribs, shrapnel marks. Then, Leon reached for the dog's left ear. All military working dogs, particularly those bred and trained at Lackland Air Force Base, were tattooed inside their left ear with a unique identification alphanumeric code. Leon gently flipped the ear back and shined his light onto the pale skin inside. There, faded but legible in black ink, was the designation, M482. M482, Leon repeated out loud, committing it to memory. He moved his hands down to the dog's neck to check for a collar. There wasn't one, but as Leon's fingers traced the thick, muscular column of the dog's throat, he felt something hard beneath the skin. He stopped. He pressed his fingers gently against the side of the dog's neck, just below the jawline. There was a raised, hard lump, roughly the size of a thumb drive. It wasn't a tumor. It was perfectly rectangular. Leon parted the dense, wet fur. A thick surgical scar ran roughly 2 inches along the skin. It was relatively fresh, maybe a few months old, and had been closed with precise professional sutures that had since dissolved. But the skin around it was slightly inflamed. Standard microchips used for pet identification were the size of a grain of rice and implanted between the shoulder blades. This was massive, and its placement was deliberate, hidden in the thickest part of the dog's ruff, where a collar would naturally conceal any scarring. "What did they put inside you, buddy?" Leon whispered. The dog finished the broth and let out a long, heavy sigh, resting his chin on his front paws, his amber eyes watching Leon's every move. Leon stood up and walked over to his desk, booting up his heavy, encrypted laptop. He couldn't go to the local authorities. If Crawford's death was a cover-up, local cops were either useless or easily compromised. He needed someone inside the system. He opened a secure messaging application and typed in a handle, Overwatch_actual. It was Thomas Barnes, an active-duty master sergeant stationed at the Pentagon who had served alongside Leon in Fallujah years ago. Barnes owed Leon his life, a debt neither man ever spoke of, but both acknowledged. Leon, you awake, Tommy? Overwatch_actual. Always. You're up late for a lumberjack. What's wrong? Leon, I need you to run a K9 designation. Quietly, off the main logs. Overwatch_actual. You know I hate when you ask for quiet favors. Give me the number. Leon, M482, German Shepherd. An agonizing 3 minutes passed. Leon paced the wooden floorboards, glancing from the laptop screen to the sleeping dog by the fire. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the cabin windows like a handful of gravel. A notification pinged. Overwatch_actual. Leon, where did you get this number? Leon, just tell me what you see. Overwatch_actual. M482. Call sign Titan. Explosive ordnance detection and tactical assault. Assigned to MARSOC. Handler, Corporal Daniel Crawford. Leon. Status. Overwatch_actual. KIA. Both of them. The file says Titan was killed alongside Crawford in a bird that went down in Anbar 14 months ago. The file is sealed tight, black ink all over it. Why are you asking about a dead dog, Leon? Leon looked at the massive, breathing animal on his rug. Leon, because the dead dog is currently bleeding on my living room floor. And he brought me Crawford's tags. The cursor blinked for a long time. Overwatch_actual. Listen to me very carefully. If that dog is alive, it means the crash was staged. I just ran a secondary check on the file's access logs. When I pinged Titan's ID, it tripped an automated flag. A red flag, Leon. High-level clearance. Leon. Meaning what? Overwatch_actual. Meaning I just woke somebody up at the NSA or CIA. They know someone is looking into the dog. If you have Titan, you are in immediate danger. Take your weapon, get out of the cabin, and go dark. Now. Before Leon could type a response, his laptop screen flickered and went entirely black. The power in the cabin abruptly died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. The comforting hum of the refrigerator ceased. The only sound was the wind howling through the trees. By the fireplace, Titan lifted his head. A low, vibrating growl rumbled deep in the dog's chest, his ears swiveling toward the front door. Leon didn't hesitate. He dropped to the floor, rolling toward the gun safe. They weren't coming. They were already here. The darkness of the cabin was absolute, save for the faint, dying embers in the wood stove. Leon's military instincts, dormant but never truly gone, roared back to life. He punched the digital code into his floor safe purely by muscle memory. The heavy steel door popped open with a muffled click. He bypassed his hunting rifles and grabbed his matte black AR-15, slapping a 30-round magazine of 56 green-tip armor-piercing rounds into the magwell. He racked the charging handle, the metallic clack-clack sounding deafening in the silent room. Next, he shoved a Sig Sauer P320 into the waistband of his jeans and grabbed a tactical chest rig holding 3 spare magazines. "Titan! Heel!" Leon whispered, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain. Despite his injuries, the German Shepherd moved with silent, fluid grace, sliding across the floorboards to press his flank against Leon's left leg. The dog's training was flawless. He knew they were in a combat scenario. He didn't bark, he just waited, his muscles coiled tight. Leon moved to the front window, pressing his back against the wall and slowly peeling back an inch of the heavy curtain. Through the sheet of rain, 50 yards down his muddy driveway, he saw them. 2 vehicles, mate black SUVs, their headlights cut, idling silently. They had rolled up the gravel driveway without lights, meaning the drivers were using night vision goggles, NVGs. Professional, Leon thought, his jaw clenching. Contractors or black ops. 4 figures emerged from the vehicles. They moved with terrifying synchronization, fanning out into a wedge formation. Even through the rain, Leon could make out the silhouette of suppressed, short-barreled rifles and heavy plate carriers. They weren't local cops doing a welfare check. This was a hit squad. They tracked him, Leon realized, his blood running cold. He looked down at the dog. "The lump in your neck, it's an active tracker." He had minutes, maybe seconds, before they breached the door. If he stayed in the cabin, he'd be cornered. His only advantage was the terrain. It was his property, his woods. "All right, buddy, we're going out the back," Leon whispered. He moved swiftly to the rear of the cabin, easing open the heavy, reinforced kitchen door. The cold Washington rain immediately soaked his shirt, but he barely registered the temperature. He slipped into the thick wall of pine trees behind the house, Titan limping silently at his side. They retreated roughly 100 yards up the muddy slope, taking cover behind the massive, moss-covered trunk of a fallen Douglas fir. From this elevated vantage point, Leon had a clear view of the cabin's rear entrance and the side windows. He settled his rifle on the log, peering through the Trigicon ACOG scope. Down below, the tactical team moved in. 2 men stacked on the front door, while another covered the rear. A loud, splintering crash echoed through the valley as a breaching ram took the front door off its hinges. The men flooded inside, the sweeping beams of their weapon-mounted flashlights cutting frantically through the darkness of Leon's living room. Leon held his breath, watching through the scope. The rain beat down on his back, mixing with the sweat on his forehead. Beside him, Titan let out a near-silent huff, his eyes locked on the men invading their territory. Suddenly, the radio clipped to Leon's chest rig, an emergency scanner he kept for local fire and police bands, crackled to life. It shouldn't have. He was on a dead frequency. "He's not in the structure," a cold, heavily modulated voice echoed through the earpiece. "Target has fled into the tree line. Activate the beacon. Pinpoint the asset." Leon ripped the earpiece out. They were tracking the dog in real time. Running was useless. The GPS signal inside Titan's neck would act as a beacon, drawing them straight to their position in the woods. Leon pulled a sterile scalpel from his medical kit, clicking on his dim red lens flashlight to preserve his night vision. He looked down at the dog. "I'm sorry, Titan," Leon whispered. "This is going to hurt, but I need you to hold still." The dog looked at him, recognizing the tone. He didn't flinch. Leon parted the wet fur on the side of Titan's neck, locating the hard, rectangular lump beneath the scar tissue. He braced the dog's head with his left forearm. With his right hand, he pressed the blade of the scalpel firmly into the skin, making a quick, precise, 1-inch incision directly over the lump. Titan let out a sharp whine, his body tensing, but he did not move away. He trusted the handler. Blood welled up instantly, thick and dark. Leon used his fingers to pry the incision open, digging his thumb and index finger into the muscle. He felt the hard plastic edge of the object. He gripped it tightly and pulled. With a sickening pop, the object slid out of the dog's flesh. Leon pressed a wad of gauze tightly against the dog's neck to staunch the bleeding, dropping the extracted object into his palm. He wiped the blood away. It wasn't just a GPS tracker. It was a ruggedized, bioglass-coated micro SD drive with a small silver antenna protruding from the top. It was a data storage device outfitted with an emergency locator beacon. Someone had implanted highly sensitive, explosive information inside a dead man's dog and then activated a homing signal to find it. Down at the cabin, one of the operatives stepped out the back door, raising a small, glowing tablet. The man pointed directly up the hill, straight at Leon's position behind the log. "Signal is stationary, elevation 50 meters, bearing north-northeast," the operative shouted. They had them. Leon looked at the bloody drive in his hand. If he left it here, they would take it and leave. But they would also know he had seen it. They wouldn't leave loose ends, and they certainly wouldn't leave the dog alive. Leon shoved the drive deep into his front pocket and grabbed a heavy rock from the mud. He taped the bloody gauze that had wrapped the tracker onto the rock, took a deep breath, and hurled it as far as he could over the ridge to his left. It crashed through the brush, tumbling down a steep ravine. "Signal is moving west. Fast!" the operative yelled, completely deceived by the thrown gauze, which still carried the microscopic tracking chip that had detached from the main drive. The squad immediately broke formation, sprinting towards the ravine, their flashlights bouncing wildly through the trees. Leon didn't wait to watch them go. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, scooped the 70-pound, bleeding German shepherd into his arms, and vanished into the black, unforgiving wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. The men hunting them had the resources of a small army, but Leon O'Connor had the shadows. And now he had the dead man's secret. Dawn broke over the Olympic Peninsula, not with sunlight, but with a bruised, slate-grey gloom. The torrential rain had dialed back to a persistent, freezing drizzle. 10 miles deep into the unforgiving timberland, completely off the grid, Leon finally stopped. He had navigated entirely by memory and compass, weaving through dense thickets of blackberry brambles and towering moss-draped cedars to reach an abandoned logging surveyor's shack he had stumbled upon a year ago. It was nothing more than a rotting plywood box with a corrugated tin roof, but it offered dry ground and concealment. Leon collapsed onto the dusty floorboards, his lungs burning. Beside him, Titan dropped heavily onto his side. The dog's breathing was shallow and ragged. The temporary gauze Leon had pressed against the dog's neck was soaked through, the bleeding sluggish but persistent. "Hold on, Titan," Leon rasped, his voice raw. He shucked off his wet tactical rig and pulled out his expanded medical kit. Using the sterile water from his canteen, Leon flushed the incision he had made in the dog's neck, along with the infected laceration on its hind leg. He worked quickly, packing the wounds with hemostatic gauze and wrapping them tightly with clean, self-adhering bandages. Through it all, the German shepherd didn't whimper. The animal just watched Leon with those haunted amber eyes, recognizing a medic's touch. Leon administered a mild, calculated dose of liquid antibiotics he kept for his own deep woods emergencies, hoping it would be enough to keep the sepsis at bay. With the dog stabilized, Leon turned his attention to the prize they had nearly died for. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the blood-stained micro SD drive. He didn't have his laptop. It was sitting dead in the compromised cabin. But he always carried a ruggedized, waterproof field tablet in his assault pack, designed for offline GPS mapping. It had an SD port. Leon wiped the drive clean on his shirt and inserted it into the tablet. The screen illuminated the dim shack, casting a pale blue glow over Leon's exhausted face. The drive was encrypted, demanding a 256-bit decryption key. Leon cursed under his breath. But then he remembered the dog tags. Crawford, Daniel J. USMCOPOS military handlers were notoriously superstitious, often using their service numbers, blood types, or deployment dates as passwords. Leon typed in Crawford's DOD identification number, followed by OPOS. Access denied. Leon paused, thinking back to his own deployments. What did a handler value more than his own life? His dog. He typed in the designation tattooed inside the dog's ear, M482 Titan. The progress bar flashed green, decryption successful. A single folder appeared on the screen, labeled Operation Sand Viper, Al-Assad. Inside were dozens of PDF documents bearing the header of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, and the Central Intelligence Agency, but it was the sole video file at the bottom that caught Leon's eye. He tapped it. The video was helmet cam footage, the timestamp placing it 14 months ago, the exact date Crawford was supposedly killed in a helicopter crash. The footage was shaky, showing the dust-choked interior of a hollowed-out concrete compound somewhere in the Iraqi desert. Crawford's voice came through the audio, panicked and breathless. "Titan, stay, quiet." The camera peeked around a crumbling pillar. Below, in the courtyard, there was no helicopter wreckage. Instead, there were two heavily armored transport trucks. And stacked between them were wooden pallets, shrink-wrapped in thick plastic. Through the torn plastic, Leon could see the contents. Stacks of $100 bills, millions of them. U.S. Treasury sequential bills, typically used for CIA Black Book operations to pay off local warlords. Standing over the pallets were 6 men in desert camouflage, stripped of all identifying unit patches. But Leon didn't need patches to recognize the man giving the orders. Standing in the center, smoking a cigarette, was Captain David H. Caldwell. Caldwell was a legend in the special operations community, a ruthless tactician who had recently transitioned into the private sector, running a shadow-tier private military company called Vanguard Solutions. "Pack it up," Caldwell's voice echoed sharply in the video. "The bird is scheduled to go down in Grid Sector 4 in 20 minutes. I want this cash manifested as destroyed in the fire. We move it over the border to Jordan by midnight." They were stealing operational funds, billions of dollars, and they were faking a catastrophic helicopter crash to cover their tracks. On the video, a piece of rubble suddenly crunched beneath Crawford's boot. Caldwell's head snapped up, looking directly at the camera. "Contact up top! Kill him!" Gunfire erupted, deafeningly loud. The camera feed went wild as Crawford sprinted through the ruins. Bullets chipped the concrete all around him. "Titan, to me!" Crawford yelled. The dog bounded into the frame. The footage showed Crawford ducking into a dark alcove. He was bleeding heavily from his shoulder. He ripped off his helmet, dropping it to the floor, which angled the camera up at his face. Crawford looked terrified, but resolute. He pulled a small, bloody object from his vest, the SD drive, and hastily shoved it deep into a slit he cut into Titan's tactical collar. "Listen to me, buddy," Crawford choked out, grabbing the dog's face. "You have to run. Find a Marine. Find a friendly. Run!" Crawford unclipped the dog's leash and shoved him toward a narrow drainage pipe leading out of the compound. Titan hesitated, whining aggressively, refusing to leave his handler. "I said run, damn it! Go!" The dog finally bolted down the pipe, just as Caldwell and two mercenaries rounded the corner. The camera captured Caldwell raising a suppressed pistol. "Where's the drive, Corporal?" Caldwell demanded. "Go to hell, traitor," Crawford spat. Caldwell pulled the trigger. The camera captured the muzzle flash, and Crawford's body slumped to the floor, dead. The video abruptly cut out. Leon sat in the freezing shack, his blood boiling. Crawford wasn't a casualty of war. He was murdered by his own commanding officer to cover up the theft of billions in black budget funds. And Caldwell had spent the last 14 months hunting down the only living witness to his treason, a dog carrying the very data that would send Caldwell to a federal penitentiary or a firing squad. Somehow, Titan had made it back to the States, likely smuggled on a military transport plane by an unwitting cargo crew, bouncing from base to base, running on pure instinct, and the last command his handler ever gave him: find a Marine. Leon looked down at the sleeping German shepherd. The dog had endured a year of starvation, hunting and infection, crossing oceans and continents just to complete his mission. "Mission accomplished, Titan," Leon whispered, his eyes hardening into chips of ice. "I've got the watch now." There was no going back to the cabin. By now, Vanguard Solutions operatives would have stripped the place to the studs, bugged the property, and set up a perimeter. Leon's bank accounts, cell phone, and truck were all compromised. He was officially a ghost. Leon waited until nightfall to move. The rain had cleared, leaving a biting, frost-laden chill in the air. He needed a vehicle that couldn't be traced to him, and he needed to get off the Olympic Peninsula. The only way east toward Seattle was over the Tacoma Narrows Bridge or via the state ferry system. Both would be watched. He hiked 3 miles parallel to the main highway until he found a long-term parking lot for hikers accessing the Hoh Rainforest trails. It took him less than 60 seconds to jimmy the lock of a faded 1990s Subaru Outback and hotwire the ignition. It was an old trick from his youth, one he hadn't used since before he enlisted. He eased Titan into the back seat, covering the shivering dog with a mildewed sleeping bag he found in the trunk. "Keep your head down, buddy," Leon instructed. The dog curled into a tight ball, practically invisible beneath the dark fabric. Leon drove cautiously, sticking to the speed limit. His mind raced, calculating his next move. The data on the drive was explosive, but it was useless if he couldn't get it into the right hands. The FBI and local police were out of the question. Vanguard's pockets were deep enough to buy local corruption, and Caldwell had Pentagon clearance. He needed Thomas Barnes. Barnes was the only man inside the wire Leon trusted implicitly. Leon pulled into the glowing, sterile light of a remote gas station off Highway 101. He left the engine running, fed 2 crumpled $20 bills into the clerk's slide drawer, and bought a cheap, prepaid burner phone. Back in the car, he dialed a sequence of numbers he had memorized years ago. An emergency extraction line Barnes maintained for deep cover operatives. It rang twice. "Status," Barnes's voice clipped through the receiver, tight and anxious. "I'm out," Leon said, his voice low. "But my house is gone. You were right. They came in hard and fast." "Thank God you're breathing," Barnes exhaled sharply. "Leon, you stepped on a landmine. After we lost connection, I dug deeper into that automated flag. It wasn't the NSA. It was a private security contract tied directly to a Black Ops logistics firm out of Virginia. Vanguard Solutions. I know, Leon interrupted. I have the drive, Tommy. I know what Caldwell did in Anbar. He murdered Crawford. He stole billions in Black Book cash, and he blamed it on a helo crash. A heavy, dead silence hung on the line. Leon, listen to me, Barnes finally said, his voice dropping an octave. If you have proof of that, you are holding a nuclear bomb. Caldwell isn't just a rogue contractor anymore. He's sitting on the advisory board for the Defense Appropriations Committee. He has senators in his pocket. He has satellite access. You cannot take this to the local authorities. They will kill you in a holding cell and say you hung yourself. I know the drill, Leon replied coldly. I need an exfil, and I need to hand this drive to someone who can put Caldwell in front of a military tribunal. I can get it to the Inspector General of the DOD, Barnes offered. He's an old-school Marine general, untouchable. But I can't do it over a digital network. Vanguard will intercept the upload. I need the physical drive. Where? Seattle, the Pioneer Square district. There's an old underground transit station, decommissioned in the 90s. Tomorrow, 1400 hours. I'll fly out of Andrews tonight under an alias. Bring the dog, Leon. If what you're saying is true, M482 is the physical evidence that ties the drive to Crawford. We'll be there, Leon said. Watch your six, brother. Caldwell has already initiated a massive manhunt. He's feeding a fabricated story to the FBI that you are a disgruntled, PTSD-addled veteran who stole classified military hardware. Every state trooper on the I-5 corridor is looking for your face. The line went dead. Leon tossed the burner phone out the window into a muddy ditch. He merged the stolen Subaru onto the interstate, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead. The dashboard clock read 2:15 a.m. 20 miles outside of Tacoma, Leon's chest tightened. Up ahead, the darkness of the highway was shattered by a sea of flashing red and blue lights. It was a massive police checkpoint. Concrete barriers funneled 3 lanes of traffic down to 1. Heavily armed Washington state troopers were walking down the line of stopped cars, shining high-powered flashlights into the faces of the drivers and checking license plates. Parked off to the shoulder, standing in the shadows just beyond the police cruisers, was a matte black SUV, the exact same model that had raided Leon's cabin. A man in tactical gear stood beside it, watching the troopers work. Vanguard was embedded with the local cops, using the FBI's fabricated warrant to cast a dragnet. Leon was trapped. If he pulled a U-turn now, they would chase him down. If he drove forward, they would see his face, and the Vanguard operative would execute him right there on the highway. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Titan was perfectly still beneath the sleeping bag, his ragged breathing the only sign he was alive. Leon pulled a dirt-smudged baseball cap low over his eyes and reached into his jacket, his fingers wrapping around the cold grip of the Sig Sauer. He took a deep breath, slowing the Subaru as he approached the glare of the checkpoint. A state trooper, a young man with a tight jaw and rain-slicked uniform, stepped up to Leon's window, tapping the glass with a heavy metal flashlight. Leon rolled down the window just enough to speak. "License and registration, sir," the trooper demanded, his eyes scanning Leon's face. "Sorry, officer," Leon said, forcing his voice to sound groggy and annoyed. "I just bought this junker off a buddy in Forks. Don't have the paperwork yet." The trooper's flashlight beam hit Leon's eyes, blinding him. The officer squinted, looking at a laminated printout taped to his clipboard. It was a grainy photo of Leon in his marine dress blues. The trooper looked from the photo to Leon. The jawline matched. The eyes matched. The trooper's hand slowly drifted down towards the holster on his duty belt. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Behind the trooper, the vanguard operative by the black SUV noticed the sudden tension. The mercenary unslung his rifle, taking a step toward Leon's car. Leon's grip tightened on his pistol. The hunter's net had closed. The trooper's hand was an inch from his service weapon. The vanguard mercenary, 20 yards away, had already raised his suppressed rifle, the red dot sight painting the driver's side door of the Subaru. Leon had less than a second to act. He couldn't kill a state trooper who was just doing his job. But if he surrendered, he and Titan were dead. Leon's left hand shot out the window, moving with blinding speed. He didn't grab for the trooper's gun. He grabbed the heavy maglite in the young officer's hand. With a brutal, twisting wrench, Leon forced the beam of the high-powered flashlight directly across the checkpoint, aiming it squarely at the vanguard operative's face. The intense beam washed out the mercenary's night vision goggles, blinding him instantly. The man stumbled backward, his rifle discharging a wild, suppressed shot into the concrete barrier. "Get down!" Leon roared at the trooper, shoving the young man hard in the chest. The trooper fell backward onto the wet asphalt, startled but unharmed. Leon slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the accelerator. The old Subaru's engine screamed, tires spinning wildly on the wet pavement before catching traction. The car surged forward, smashing through the orange plastic traffic cones and sideswiping a police cruiser. "Suspect is fleeing! Shots fired!" The radio on the downed trooper's shoulder screeched. Behind them, the vanguard operative recovered his vision and opened fire. A volley of 5.56mm rounds chewed through the Subaru's trunk. The rear windshield exploded in a shower of tempered glass, the freezing wind howling into the cabin. "Down, Titan!" Leon yelled, instinctively ducking his head as a bullet punched through the headrest of the passenger seat, missing him by inches. He didn't look back. He swerved the battered station wagon onto the shoulder, passing a line of terrified civilian cars, and merged onto the off-ramp for the port of Tacoma at 80 miles an hour. Red and blue lights exploded in his rearview mirror as 3 state trooper cruisers broke formation to pursue. The vanguard SUV wouldn't be far behind. Leon knew he couldn't outrun police interceptors in a rusted 90-horsepower wagon. He needed to break their line of sight and vanish. He took a hard right into the sprawling, labyrinthine industrial sector of the port. Towering stacks of shipping containers created narrow steel canyons. The rain was picking up again, turning the unlit dockyards into a confusing soup of shadows and sodium vapor lights. Leon slammed the brakes, drifting the Subaru behind a mountain of rusted shipping containers, completely hidden from the main road. He killed the engine and the headlights. Seconds later, the wail of sirens shrieked past his hiding spot, the cruisers speeding deeper into the port, chasing a ghost. Leon exhaled a shaky breath, turning to the back seat. "Titan, status!" The pile of mildewed sleeping bag shifted. The German Shepherd poked his massive head out, ears pinned back, panting softly. He was covered in glass shards, but unhit. "Good boy," Leon whispered. They couldn't stay in the Subaru. The police would lock down the port within 10 minutes, and Vanguard had thermal imaging drones. They needed a new ride. Leon grabbed his assault pack, shoved the Sig Sauer back into his waistband, and helped Titan out of the bullet-riddled car. They moved like shadows through the shipping yard, sticking to the blind spots between the massive steel boxes. 100 yards away, an overnight dock worker was stepping out of a running Ford E-Series commercial plumbing van to unlock a chain-link gate. Leon moved silently up behind the man. He didn't draw a weapon. He just tapped the man on the shoulder. As the worker spun around, startled, Leon gripped him by the jacket collar and shoved a thick wad of cash, $500 from his emergency stash, into the man's chest pocket. "I'm taking your van," Leon said, his voice deadly serious but calm. "Tell the cops it was stolen by a guy in a ski mask in 20 minutes. You get to keep the cash and your life, understand?" The dock worker, eyes wide, looked at the towering, blood-spattered veteran and the massive, scarred military dog standing rigidly at his side. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Take it, man. Keys are in the ignition." "Appreciate it." Leon and Titan climbed into the plumbing van. The back was filled with PVC pipes, wrench sets, and the overwhelming smell of industrial solvent, perfect for masking Titan's scent from tracking dogs. Leon pulled out of the port, blending in flawlessly with the early morning commercial traffic heading north towards Seattle. The sun was just beginning to bleach the eastern horizon, casting a pale grey light over the Puget Sound. He had the drive. He had the dog. Now, he just had to survive the meeting. Pioneer Square is the historic heart of Seattle, a neighborhood of red brick buildings and cobblestone streets. But beneath the trendy coffee shops and art galleries lies a forgotten world. After the Great Seattle Fire of 1889, the city was rebuilt on top of itself, leaving a labyrinth of subterranean tunnels, abandoned storefronts, and collapsed alleys buried 20 feet below the modern pavement. It was a tourist attraction by day, but by 1400 hours on a dreary Wednesday, certain condemned sections of the underground were pitch black and dead silent. Leon navigated the damp, crumbling brick corridor, using only the faint ambient light filtering down through the purple glass skylights embedded in the sidewalks above. The air smelled of mildew and century-old earth. Titan walked at a perfect heel, his left side pressing against Leon's right leg. The antibiotics had brought the dog's fever down, and his limp was less pronounced, fueled by the adrenaline of being back on a mission. "Overwatch," Leon whispered into the darkness as he reached the designated coordinates. A cavernous space that used to be a subterranean bank lobby in the 1890s. A shadow detached itself from a rotting support pillar. Thomas Barnes stepped into the dim light. He wore a heavy wool peacoat over a charcoal suit, looking every bit the hardened Pentagon intelligence officer. He was 50 years old, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen too many flag-draped coffins. "You look like hell, Leon," Barnes said softly, his eyes dropping to the German shepherd. Barnes's expression softened, a profound sadness flashing across his face. "And you must be Titan. God, I read your KIA report myself, buddy." Titan didn't break stance. He merely tracked Barnes with his amber eyes, waiting for Leon's cue. "He's the only reason I know the truth," Leon said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out the blood-stained SD drive and held it up. "It's all here, Tommy. Helmet cam footage of Caldwell executing Crawford. Ledgers, DARPA files. Vanguard was stealing billions to fund their own private wars, and they buried Crawford to hide it." Barnes reached out and took the drive, wrapping his gloved hand around the small piece of plastic. He looked at it like it was radioactive. "The Inspector General is waiting for my call," Barnes said. "I have a secure transport waiting at Boeing Field. We can have Caldwell in federal custody by midnight." "Good," Leon exhaled, feeling the crushing weight of the last 24 hours begin to lift. Take the dog too. He's physical evidence. I'll vanish until the dust settles. Barnes nodded, slipping the drive into his breast pocket. Leon, you did good. Crawford would be proud. Suddenly, Titan let out a vicious, echoing bark. The dog lunged forward, placing himself squarely between Leon and the only exit to the subterranean lobby, the hair on his back standing straight up. A deep, thunderous growl vibrated through the underground chamber. Leon drew his Sig Sauer in a fraction of a second, his eyes scanning the darkness. Tommy, did you secure your tail? I flew commercial under an alias. I scrubbed my route, Barnes yelled, drawing his own compact sidearm. Clank. A metallic object the size of a soup can bounced down the brick stairs from the street level. Flashbang! Cover! Leon roared. He threw his arms over his face and dove behind a rusted cast-iron bank teller's cage. The explosion was blindingly white and deafening. The concussive wave rattled the dust from the brick ceiling, plunging the room into chaotic, ringing silence. Before the smoke could clear, the rappelling ropes dropped. 4 Vanguard operatives in full tactical gear and gas masks descended through a ventilation shaft in the ceiling, landing with heavy thuds on the dirt floor. Red laser sights pierced the smoke, sweeping the room. Target acquired, a modulated voice echoed. Barnes, they tracked your comms, Leon shouted over the ringing in his ears. He popped up from behind the iron cage, double-tapping his SIG. 2 9mm hollow points caught the lead operative in the chest plate, dropping him to the floor. Gunfire erupted, sparking off the brick and iron. The deafening roar of automatic weapons filled the enclosed space. Leon, the drive! Barnes yelled, returning fire from behind a stone pillar. Hold your fire! Hold your fire! A commanding voice boomed over a bullhorn from the top of the stairs. The Vanguard operatives ceased firing, taking cover in the shadows, their weapons trained on Leon and Barnes's positions. Footsteps echoed down the brick staircase. Slow, deliberate. Captain David H. Caldwell walked into the dim light of the underground lobby. He wore a tailored trench coat over a tactical vest. He looked perfectly calm, a predator cornering its prey. Staff Sergeant O'Connor, Caldwell called out, his voice smooth and dripping with arrogance. I have to admit I'm impressed. Surviving the cabin, breaking the checkpoint, making it all the way to Seattle. You're a credit to the Corps. Go to hell, Caldwell, Leon spat, keeping his gun leveled at the shadows. Now, Caldwell chided, stepping further into the room. Let's be pragmatic. Master Sergeant Barnes here thought his little line to the Inspector General was secure. He forgot that Vanguard built the encryption architecture the Pentagon uses. We've been listening to you since you made that first phone call on Highway 101. Caldwell gestured to his men. Toss out the drive, O'Connor, and put the dog down. You do that, and I'll let you and Barnes walk away. A veteran with PTSD lost his mind for a few days. We wiped the slate clean. You murdered a Marine, Barnes yelled, leaning out to aim his weapon at Caldwell. A suppressed sniper shot cracked from the darkness of a side tunnel. Barnes gasped, a red blossom appearing on his right shoulder. The impact spun him around, and he collapsed onto the dirt floor, dropping his weapon. Tommy! Leon yelled. Last chance, O'Connor, Caldwell said, drawing his own pistol. The drive and the dog, or you both die down here, and we bury this tunnel forever. Leon looked down. Titan was beside him, ignoring the gunfire, ignoring the chaos. The dog's eyes were locked onto Caldwell. The animal recognized the voice. He recognized the man who had murdered his handler. Titan didn't look at Leon for a command. This wasn't about obedience anymore. This was about vengeance. With a terrifying primal roar, the wounded German shepherd launched himself over the iron barricade, sprinting directly into the line of fire. Titan was a 70-pound missile of muscle, bone, and fury. He didn't run in a straight line. His military conditioning kicked in, weaving erratically through the rubble to throw off Caldwell's aim. "Put the animal down!" Caldwell shrieked, his arrogant composure shattering instantly. He leveled his customized Glock 19 and fired 3 rapid shots. 2 rounds chipped the brick floor, showering the German shepherd in dust. The third grazed Titan's injured flank, leaving a fresh streak of crimson. But the pain only seemed to ignite the dog's rage. Caldwell tried to backpedal toward the stone stairs, but he was too slow. Titan launched himself off a shattered marble counter, clearing the last 10 feet in the air. He hit Caldwell squarely in the chest. The sheer kinetic force of the impact drove the vanguard commander backward, slamming him brutally onto the uneven cobblestones. Titan didn't go for the throat. He went for the weapon. The dog's jaws clamped down on Caldwell's right forearm with bone-crushing force. Caldwell screamed, a high, reedy sound of absolute agony, as the Glock clattered out of his hand into the darkness. The 3 remaining vanguard operatives broke cover to save their commander, raising their short-barreled rifles. That was their fatal mistake. In their panic to shoot the dog, they forgot about the Marine. Leon didn't hesitate. Moving with the cold, mechanical precision of an infantryman in a target-rich environment, he vaulted over the iron teller's cage. He fired his Sig Sauer on the move, double-tapping the chest plate of the closest mercenary. The impact staggered the man long enough for Leon to close the distance, driving his boot into the operative's knee and executing a flawless tactical takedown, neutralizing him with a strike to the jaw. "Sniper, 3 o'clock high," Barnes choked out from the dirt, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Leon dove behind a collapsed structural pillar, just as a heavy, suppressed round obliterated the brickwork where his head had been a fraction of a second prior. He glanced up. The muzzle flash had come from an elevated ventilation grate near the ceiling of the subterranean tunnel. Leon had 1 magazine left. He ejected the half-empty mag from his pistol, slapped in a fresh one, and racked the slide. In the center of the room, Caldwell was thrashing wildly, trying to gouge Titan's eyes with his free hand. "Shoot the dog! Shoot the damn dog!" Caldwell wailed to his sniper. Titan maintained his vicious lock on Caldwell's arm, pinning the commanding officer to the floor. The German shepherd's deep, guttural snarl echoed through the chamber, a sound of pure, unadulterated retribution. The sniper up in the grate shifted his rifle, aiming down at the wrestling mass of man and dog. Leon saw the red laser dot flick across the cobblestones, tracking toward Titan's head. Leon stepped out from behind the pillar, exposing himself entirely to the sniper's line of sight. He raised his Sig in a rigid, 2-handed weaver stance, ignored the screaming chaos around him, exhaled half a breath, and squeezed the trigger 3 times in rapid succession. Crack, crack, crack. The 9mm rounds sparked against the iron grate. A sharp, muffled groan echoed from the ductwork. The red laser dot jerked violently upward toward the ceiling, then vanished as the sniper's heavy rifle clattered down from the shaft and smashed onto the floor below. Silence descended on the underground chamber, broken only by Caldwell's panicked hyperventilating and Titan's low growls. Leon walked slowly toward the center of the room, his weapon trained squarely on the vanguard commander's head. "Titan, aus!" Leon commanded, using the traditional German release word for military K9S. The dog didn't release immediately. His amber eyes flicked to Leon, questioning the order. The blood of his handler's killer was in his teeth. "I said aus, buddy. It's over." Slowly, reluctantly, Titan opened his jaws. He stepped back, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his muzzle. But he did not break his aggressive posture, standing over Caldwell like a sentinel. Caldwell sobbed, clutching his mangled forearm. His tailored trench coat was covered in centuries-old mud and his own blood. The untouchable mastermind of Vanguard Solutions looked pathetic, writhing on the dirt floor. "You're a dead man, O'Connor," Caldwell hissed through gritted teeth, his eyes wide with fear and malice. "You think you can just walk away? Vanguard owns the oversight committees. We own the supply lines. You turn that drive in, and they will bury it, and then they will bury you." Leon looked down at the man, feeling nothing but profound disgust. "You forgot the first rule of the chain of command, Caldwell. You don't mess with the enlisted men." Leon reached into his jacket and pulled out the blood-stained SD drive, holding it up so Caldwell could see it. "You're right about one thing. Vanguard is entrenched," Leon said coldly, "which is why Barnes didn't call the Pentagon." Caldwell's face went pale. "What?" Barnes, leaning heavily against the brick wall and clutching his bleeding shoulder, let out a ragged chuckle. "I called a friend at the Department of Justice, Public Integrity Section. They've been looking for a reason to audit Vanguard for 3 years. And while you were busy jamming military frequencies, I used a hardline analog copper wire from the subway maintenance box behind you to send them a little preliminary ping. Above them, on the street level of Pioneer Square, the wail of sirens began to bleed through the purple glass skylights. But it wasn't the erratic shriek of local police cruisers. It was the heavy, synchronized roar of Federal Bureau of Investigation tactical vehicles moving to secure the perimeter. Caldwell stared in absolute horror as the realization washed over him. His private empire was crumbling, brought down by a stray dog and a discarded grunt. "Get up," Leon ordered, kicking Caldwell's feet. "You're going to walk up those stairs, and you're going to face the people you betrayed. You're going to face institutional justice, Captain." 3 months later, the crisp, salt-tinged air of the Puget Sound carried the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Leon O'Connor stood on the wraparound porch of a modest, cedar-shingled cabin on Whidbey Island. It wasn't completely off the grid like his last place, but it offered the quiet he needed. He took a sip of black coffee from a chipped mug, watching the morning fog roll off the grey waters of the Pacific. The fallout from the Pioneer Square incident had been nothing short of an earthquake in Washington, D.C. The data recovered from the SD drive implanted in Titan's neck had provided incontrovertible evidence of Vanguard Solutions' massive embezzlement operation. Captain David H. Caldwell had been stripped of his rank, his security clearances, and his dignity. Faced with federal charges of treason, murder, and the theft of over $2 billion in Black Book operational funds, Caldwell's high-ranking political allies had abandoned him instantly to save themselves. He was currently sitting in a maximum security cell at Fort Leavenworth, awaiting a military tribunal that would likely end with a life sentence in solitary confinement. Vanguard Solutions had been dismantled, its assets frozen and seized by the Department of Justice. The stolen money, traced through the encrypted ledgers on the drive, was quietly repatriated to the Treasury. The DoD had formally acknowledged Corporal Daniel J. Crawford's true sacrifice. His status was changed from a generic KIA in a helicopter crash to a highly decorated casualty of a classified anti-corruption operation. A quiet, closed-door ceremony was held at Camp Lejeune, honoring his absolute dedication to his country and his K9 partner. Leon felt a heavy weight pressing against his knee. He looked down. Titan sat beside him, leaning his massive 70-pound frame into Leon's leg. The German shepherd looked entirely different from the skeletal, mud-caked ghost that had appeared in the alley behind Miller's Market. His black and tan coat was plush and shining with health. The laceration on his hind leg had healed into a neat, pale scar, and while he still walked with a slight limp on damp mornings, his spirit was unbroken. "Morning, buddy," Leon said softly, reaching down to scratch the thick fur behind Titan's ears. Titan let out a low, contented huff, his amber eyes closing as he leaned into the affection. Due to the extreme circumstances of the case and the dog's trauma, Thomas Barnes, who had made a full recovery from his gunshot wound, had pulled massive strings at the Pentagon. Titan, M482, was officially granted an honorable medical discharge from the United States Marine Corps. The adoption paperwork had been finalized 2 weeks ago. Titan wasn't military property anymore. He was family. A sleek black government sedan rolled up the gravel driveway, crunching to a halt near the porch. The driver's side door opened, and Thomas Barnes stepped out, wearing civilian clothes, a casual bomber jacket and jeans. "Nice place," Barnes called out, walking up the wooden steps. He reached down and offered the back of his hand to Titan. The dog sniffed it briefly before giving a single, approving wag of his tail. "It's quiet," Leon replied, offering Barnes a half-smile. "What brings you out to the islands, Tommy? I thought your desk was in Virginia." "It is," Barnes said, leaning against the porch railing and looking out at the water. "But I had to deliver some news in person. The DOJ finished sweeping Caldwell's offshore accounts. We found the rest of the dark money." "Good," Leon said simply. "Caldwell tried to leverage his knowledge of other corrupt contractors for a plea deal," Barnes continued, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "The judge threw it out, said a man who murders his own men and shoots a state trooper doesn't get to make deals. He's going to rot behind bars, Leon." Leon nodded slowly. He looked out at the water, then down at the dog, sitting loyally by his side. The nightmares of the sandbox hadn't completely vanished. There were still nights when Leon woke up in a cold sweat, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. But the crippling isolation was gone. He had a purpose now. He had saved a life, and in return, the dog had saved his. "You did a good thing, Leon," Barnes said quietly. "You brought Crawford home." "No," Leon corrected, setting his coffee mug on the railing. He knelt down, wrapping an arm around Titan's broad, muscular shoulders. "Titan brought him home. I just carried the bag." Titan looked up at Leon, his amber eyes bright and alert, ears perked toward the sound of seagulls crying over the water. The storm had finally broken, leaving behind a hard-won peace. If your heart pounded alongside Leon and Titan as they fought against impossible odds to expose the ultimate betrayal, smash that like button right now. This story proves that loyalty isn't just a word. It's a bond that survives even the darkest corners of human greed. Titan's relentless courage reminds us all of the incredible sacrifices made by our K9 heroes and their handlers every single day. Do you think you would have risked it all like Leon did for a dog you just met? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your take on Caldwell's fate. Don't forget to share this thrilling, real-life military drama with your friends. and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss out on our next heart-stopping narrative. Stay vigilant, stay loyal, and keep watching.